A recent newspaper article suggested that John Boorman might be leaving Ireland for Britain or for the United States. Is this because he feels that there's no future for an Irish film industry?
Well, I didn't come to Ireland for the film industry.
Right, but do you see any future for a film industry here?
Well, that's up to the people who want to be filmmakers, I think. I think the answer is yes. I think that since this move by the government, it's become a distinct possibility for the first time.
You've filmed in Ardmore before, of course. As a studio, how does it strike you?
Well, I've worked here now more or less continuously for the last 4 or 5 years on 3 pictures, my 3 last pictures. And the one I've just completed I've made wholly here. The earlier ones I've made partly at Ardmore. I think, and I've worked in studios in various parts of the world, and I'd say that it's a very fine studio. I think that it's placed in a rather special way. I think it's rather has advantages which very few studios have. See, most studios are built on the edge of capital cities, and they tend to have been overtaken by development. I'm talking about Los Angeles and London, Hamburg, wherever you look, and they don't have the same access to locations as they used to have. I think this is rather specially placed.
A director coming in here, of course, has to bring in a certain amount of foreign staff with him to supplement the Irish staff. Now, doesn't this make it much more expensive for you? Does it, in fact, price you out of working in Ardmore?
Well, the answer to that is obviously no. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made this picture, Zardos, which I've just completed here. It is a consideration. I tried to make Zardos with as many Irish personnel as possible. I was obliged to bring people in certain areas simply because the qualified people don't really exist at the present time. There are certain areas that have been somewhat neglected, and I think this is just simply because Irish film workers haven't had the opportunity of working consistently on pictures. They haven't developed in certain areas, and some areas are more difficult to develop in than others. Where they're very strong is in the craftsmen. They're very strong in electricians. In fact, Geoffrey Unsworth, who was the cinematographer of my last film, a distinguished and very experienced man who just last year won both the British and American Oscars, said that the electricians here were better than he'd encountered in any part of the world.
Why do you think, then, that Ardmore has had such an unhappy history, financially?
Well, it's been grossly mismanaged. I would say that's really the simple answer. Because if you look at the situation, Ireland is one of the very few countries in the world that doesn't give some kind of incentive to filmmakers, particularly to foreign filmmakers coming into the country. And in fact, to make a film in Ireland, you do so in the teeth of official opposition. It's the most difficult airport in the world to film at, the most recalcitrant bureaucracy to deal with. You're dealing in a country which is very largely visually illiterate, so that you don't have any tradition of film or visual understanding to fall back on. And despite all that, you find that films are consistently made in Ireland, that people want to come to Ireland and make films.
But if there was this bureaucracy when Ardmore was in the hands of private enterprise, isn't it going to be worse if it becomes a semi-state organisation?
The kind of thing I was talking about was that if you want to film, for instance, I wanted to import an ape, and I applied to the appropriate ministry, and I was turned down. I mean, their reaction is to turn everything down. You see, I mean, that seems to me to be the way of it. In fact, there was really, as I discovered subsequently, there was nothing to prevent me importing an ape. It was just that if they're asked for something, their instinct is to turn it down. I mean, that's the kind of lack of cooperation I'm talking about. My belief is that Ardmore, if it's run by a semi-state government, department. It depends on the constitution of that board. I mean, I hope that the people who will be running it will be enlightened and anxious to make it work. I know from my discussions with members of the government that they are going to follow a recommendation which I made, which was that government departments should cooperate with filmmakers and should give them help.
You obviously welcome the idea of government intervention at this stage, then?
Well, I think it's marvellous because it means that Ireland's going to come in line with most other developed countries who want to, for various reasons, encourage a film industry. I would like to see it develop in such a way that there is some form of school. I've suggested an apprenticeship scheme. I think that if incoming films are given incentives to film here, then in return they should be obliged to take on apprentices to work in different departments. This is a cheap and effective way of having a film school. I think if you set up a film school into an elaborate way, it can be a very expensive operation, and finally the students don't get a chance to work on films. I mean, filmmaking is such a pragmatic art. I mean, it's really the art of the possible, that you must work in a practical way if you're going to become a film